It's the weekend and you have financial questions that need answering. That can only mean one thing. It's time for Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome to the Labor Day edition of the Jill on Money show. Hey, here is something incredibly exciting. We are talking to you live from the Capital One Bank Studios. Woo! Capital One Bank sponsoring our studios. I think that we should have like a backdrop with maybe they'll send us a banner. We can do some social stuff, tweet with a Capital One thing behind me. That'd be kind of cool. They should totally do that. Let's get our friends over in the sales department to try to get that going. I'm always wanting to make this a better sales experience. Want everyone to be happy. Okay, this is the program where money is not scary. It's not boring. Also, the place where we can celebrate the fact that based on certain, and I'm not saying it's a definite, but based on certain measures, we are now in the longest bull market on record. Who cares? It's long. It's been going on for a while, essentially since March of 2009. So you know what that means? It does not mean that a bear market is necessarily around the corner. But what it does mean is that this is a great time, like right after Labor Day, or maybe on Monday on Labor Day, you'll labor a little bit, or Tuesday morning when you get back to work. What you can do is open up your investment accounts and just look at what's going on. And you can take a moment to savor the fact that stocks are higher. Then what you should be looking at is, hey, is my allocation still in line with what I want? Do I have the money that I want in stocks and bonds, commodities, cash? You know, if you have not rebalanced this year, a lot of people haven't because maybe you do it automatically, but sometimes you just kind of, let things go a bit. Now's a great time to rebalance, especially if you've got a big chunk of company stock that's sitting in your retirement account. I know a lot of you do. You can also use this opportunity when stock market indexes are making new highs to free up money that you might need within the next year. So a lot of people have money that's invested in their retirement accounts, but they have other money in non-retirement funds. And now's a great time to take money in the non-retirement accounts and set it aside for anything you might need within the next year. So what could that be? Maybe you've got a tuition payment. Maybe you've got a house or a car down payment. Maybe you just want to replenish your emergency reserve fund. All of those things are perfect opportunities for you to just take some money off the top. And oh, by the way, don't complain to me that you have to pay taxes. Of course you have to pay taxes. Of course you have to pay taxes. That's the deal. So it's a good time, okay? So mostly remember that, stocks are rising because companies are making money. Now let's let you cash in on that. That's the big get for this stock market high. All right, remember, if you want to get in touch with us, just send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com, and we'd be happy to help you out. Right now, we've got David who is on the line. Hello, David. Welcome to the program. What can I do for you, sir?
Oh, thanks for having me.
Of course.
I'm contemplating the standard advice of waiting till age 67 or 70 to collect Social Security, and I don't think it makes sense.
Okay, tell me how you're thinking it through, and let's walk down the whole path with you.
Well, if I husband the investments I have by taking Social Security at 62,
mm-hmm.
and even figuring a modest return of, let's say, 5%,
okay,
it'll take till roughly age 84 if I waited till 70 before I break even.
I thought that you may be right. I think that when I look at the break even, it was usually 82 or 83, but maybe it is 84 now.
It would depend on the rate of return. That you
right,
look at.
right. So let's call it. I'm going to use your 84. So how old are you right now?
57.
Do you have a spouse?
Yes.
Is your spouse the same age?
Yes.
Okay. And did your spouse claim? Will your spouse claim on his or her own record or on half of your record?
My record.
Okay. Okay. And talk to me about, like, generally, how healthy are you guys?
We're very healthy.
Okay, wait a second. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm going to be a doctor for a second. Parents still alive?
My mother just turned 98.
Oh, my God. Okay.
So my father has passed.
What age did he die?
70.
Okay. That's enough to get your attention. What about your spouse's parents?
Her father is alive, and he's in his early 80s, and her mother passed at 46.
Oh, my gosh. So you've got really a mixed bag there. But you are healthy. So that's the most important thing, that each of you is healthy. Okay.
Yes, we are.
So how much money have you saved?
1.2.
1.2 million. Okay. And your house, you own your house?
Yeah, we're debt free.
Okay, debt free. Would you, if you retire, when you retire, I should say, would you stay in the house?
Yes.
How much is the house worth?
About 100.
Okay. How much do you think you need to live on for real at retirement?
Our current annual spending, if you make a slight adjustment for taxation, because obviously that skews everything.
Yep.
But our current annual spending is about 65.
Okay, 65 grand. Okay. And of the 1.2 million bucks that you have, is that in retirement account or non-retirement accounts?
Probably 80% of it is retirement, probably 60% in 401k type, 20% in Roth, and then the remainder in a brokerage account.
Okay. So that's interesting because you obviously, of the $1.2 million, there's some taxes that you're going to owe, right? Because you got to pull the money out. All right. I'm on the fence for you, and I'm going to tell you why. First of all, when do you actually plan to retire?
My intention is to retire from full-time work at 60 and from part-time work at 62.
Okay. And when you're working part-time for those 2 years, will you cover your annual expenses?
Yes.
How much do you guys make right now?
$165.
Okay. So what you're saying is, I'm going to take a job. I'll cover the let's call it pre-tax of 85-ish, and you'll be able to do something. And then at 60, so then the question is, do I claim at 62? Do I wait to full retirement age? It's very exciting. So let's take a quick break, pay some bills, and when we come back, we will talk more with David about whether or not it makes sense for him to claim Social Security early. I'll give you the upside and the downside. You're listening to Jill on Money. While we're on break, hop onto the website, JillOnMoney.com. You can subscribe to our podcast, Better Off, and you can also sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Woohoo! All right, that's enough of that. We'll be right back.
Follow Jill on Twitter and Instagram for more personal finance content. Just use the handle @JillOnMoney. Now, back to the show.
You are back with Jill on Money, and yes, we are talking to you from the Capital One Bank Studios. I just like saying that. Do I sound like an announcer? Can I get any voiceover work if I do that better? Live from the Capital One Bank Studios, it's Jill on Money. How does that sound? Would you hire me, Mark, or not? Really? Let me do it again. One more shot. Live from the Capital One Bank Studios, it's Jill on Money. He's not hiring me. This was my whole retirement plan for myself, was to do some voiceover work. Mark's now put a little fly in that ointment, much in the same way that I may be putting fly in the ointment of the plan by David to actually retire and take Social Security early. No, I'm not sure I'm going to put that. So, David, welcome back, first of all. We're talking about Social Security. Let me just ask you a couple of more questions, and then we're going to suss it out. At age 62, what would your retirement benefit be through Social Security? What's the dollar amount?
33.
3,300.
No,
33,000
a year.
Okay. Full retirement age. What's the number?
Oh boy, I'd have to look that back up.
Give me a
I couldn't
guess.
tell you off the top of my head.
Oh, rats. All right. Well, here's the thing. When you talk about claiming Social Security, it is such a roll of the dice. And here's why. If you tell me when you're going to die, I will tell you when to claim Social Security. Right? You already know that. That's it.
Yeah,
That's the whole. That's the game
plan. That would make it easy.
So there are two instances where I think taking it at 62 makes perfect sense. One is that you're sick. You know, for example, if you said, I have a chronic illness, and I know it's unlikely, like this happened to my dad. My dad was sort of, he retired a little bit early. He had a pretty significant heart condition, and we talked about should he claim early. And I was like, well, you know, if you wait till your full retirement age. And he goes, yeah, but how long am I going to live? And I kept saying, oh, Daddy, don't be ridiculous. But he was kind of right, because he died when he was 76. So he took it 62. The problem was that my mother didn't claim on her own record. She was claiming half of his. So now when he died, yes, that was smarter for him. But my mother is stuck with half of a crapo benefit, right? Because it's 62. And it's about 25% less than what you probably would get at your full retirement age. And since your wife is claiming on your record, it would make it suggests to me that maybe waiting could be a little bit smarter for you guys. Now, the other instance when I say to claim at 62 is if you have no choice, meaning you have no money saved, and that's the only money you could live on. And I guess there's a third choice, which is I have so much money, I just want the cash flow, so who cares? Okay. So I think that given that you're both healthy, that I don't see why claiming at 62 makes a ton of sense. I do think that waiting till, let's say you're worried about 83, 84, I think that if you look at both of you, the statistical or the actuarial table would probably argue for you to wait till your full retirement age, because you probably both are healthier than either of your parents would be. And the fact, by the way, David, you have a 98-year-old mother, and she's got, it sounds like the fathers didn't do so well in either of those families, but I presume that your wife's father dying early was probably something unique that wouldn't translate to her life.
Well, actually, it was her mother, but
I'm sorry, her mother. That in other words, like we all have the fear that we're like, oh my God, we're gonna like sort of be the exact replicas of our parents. But unless you have something in your history today that would argue that you would be facing a shorter life expectancy than the actuarial table, I'd be more inclined to wait. And I really think that if you're willing to work part-time till 62, would you be willing to work part-time till your full retirement age?
Well, my concern isn't really the actuarial.
Uh-huh.
My concern is that I trust my investments more than I trust a feckless Congress to give me 8% more of money they don't have.
First of all, I love that you use the word feckless. It's one of my favorite words ever. So that's number one. Okay, so let's talk about that. So what you're saying is, hey, I'm now concerned that Social Security ain't going to be there for me at that, say, $33,000 level, right? Or let's call it $42,000 if you wait till your full retirement age, right? So I don't think you have a lot to worry about, because regardless of any changes that could happen in the future, I do not believe that the Social Security system is going to penalize anybody over the age of 55 today. In fact, any of the plans that have been floated by either party have grandfathered in basically if you're over 50 or 55, And so I think that is, I get that you're worried about that, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think that you're looking at it as like you trust yourself. And I'm saying I like 8% guaranteed. You don't trust that it's going to be 8% guaranteed. I do. So if you really don't trust it, then you're going to take it at 62. That's that. But I think that that's probably the wrong decision for you guys. And I think that, the likeliest scenario about Social Security is that they don't means test it, but that they basically take anyone under the age of 50 and they start slowly but surely increasing the full retirement age, and then also raise the Social Security wage base. That's probably the most likely scenario, or even the tax. And under those circumstances, you would not worry at all if you're 57 years old. And I just don't think that's the likelier scenario. What I think is the bigger risk for you is that you have this $1.2 million, which you have to take risk every single day as you manage it. And so that to me is a bigger risk than all of a sudden you're going to have your Social Security benefits slashed. But again, it's close. And if you are willing to work and maybe make up for the fact that you have a lower Social Security payment, and your wife will also have a lower Social Security payment over time, then you might say that you trust yourself more than the government. But I think you're better off waiting.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Hey, look, good luck, and thank you so much for calling, and enjoy whatever you do in terms of retirement. You can call us back and let us know what you do, all right?
All right.
Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Mark, that guy's claiming early, right? I would say so. He sort of, brushed me off. I'm done with you. Thanks a lot, Schlesinger. Think I'll do what I want to do now. I do like the word feckless. I just don't believe that is the way that Social Security is going to be reformed. Meaning that I don't think they're going to take someone who's 57 years old or 60 years old at the time, right? That's not how it's going to go down. I mean, you have to kind of read in on this to understand that, people who are 55 and 60 years old vote. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about like a huge contingent of people who vote. And I think under that, you sometimes you just have to game it out, right? And if you game it out, I think you would find that you're better off taking this. I'm going to wait as long as I can. I mean, look, I had a father who died early at 76, but my mother's chugging along, and I got some longevity on both sides. My father had a weird thing, totally. And that's the other thing. You have to be very clinical sometimes in your analysis. Like my father died fairly early, but he died because of a weird early childhood thing that I don't have. And maybe I'll get now listen, I've jinxed myself. I'm going to get hit by the gosh darn M57 as I cross the street. That's a bus for everyone who's listening. Yeah, it's true, Mark. You should get some key man insurance on me. You know that? If I were you, I'd take out $1 million policy on me. That'll float you for a while. That's not a bad idea for you. Interesting. Now I'm going to think about that during the break. And I have so much time to think about it during the break, enjoying the Capital One Bank studios here at the Jill on Money Show. If you've got a financial question, please send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. Hey, during the break, go check out our website, jillonmoney.com. You can read, listen, watch, and sign up for the free weekly newsletter. Woohoo! All right, when we return, more of your questions. We'll be right back.
Do I invest here? Should I put my money there? Jill Schlesinger can help you. Back to Jill on Money.
You're back with Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. And I'm just blowing through all these emails. I'm just trying to plow out from underneath the piles and piles of emails. So let's get into it. Wendy wants to know about retirement investing. My question is, should I take the money that I have in my savings account and invest it? We have about 125. She's talking about she and her husband have $125,000 in his 401k and $100,000 in a CD. It's currently earning 1.5% for another year. There's $65,000 in a MetLife annuity, $35,000 annuity that was inherited, $8,000 in a Roth, $22,000 in an IRA CD. We just inherited $200,000. It's currently sitting in a savings account. We will need all of this when we retire. Neither of us have pensions. I've been getting different opinions what to do. One more, please. We're both in our early 60s. We're currently working. I don't think it's a bad idea to invest it, Wendy, but here's what I would suggest. Number one, if I were going to invest it, and I'm not saying that, I'm not reading so much into whether you want to manage it yourself or not, but it's when you have lots of different opinions, I imagine that you must be talking to different advisors / salespeople. So what I would like to encourage you to do is to make sure that if you're talking to somebody about this who's in the business, that person is acting as a fiduciary at all times, meaning that they are providing advice that is in your best interest at all times, not selling you stuff. And once you find somebody like that, maybe it's a fee-only person, maybe it's a CFP who adheres to the fiduciary standards at all times, just ask that question. Do you have to put me first at all times? And if the answer is yes, then keep talking. My 2 cents is that, yes, you should invest it, but it should be invested conservatively. So, I love that you have $100,000 in a CD. So that's perfect. You've got the 2 annuities for another $100,000. This could kind of augment your non-retirement accounts, but it should be very plain vanilla. It should be, sort of a balanced portfolio, which means keep the risky stuff, say, to 50% or less. I might even say it would be like 40% risky, 60% not so risky. The big difference that I think you have to know is that in your situation, it really depends on how much money you're going to need to tap when you do retire. So I need a tiny bit more information, but that's my general sense. Yes, of course, certainly there is something to be said here for investing, but just be careful, okay? I wrote an article about trade deficits. And thank you, Don, for this first sentence. Jill, good on you for writing about trade deficits. All I ask is more. The majority of the public just does not understand that the more you and others tell us, the better off we are. How about articles about NAFTA, the downside of tariffs? Trump talks about how bad he thinks NAFTA is, but he never supplies facts. Anyway, I think that this is very nice. So tell us about tariffs, how they can bankrupt farmers. Listen, the farmers are really going to start to feel the heat soon. There is going to be some aid to them with this $12 billion that's being freed up by the administration that goes back to a Depression era entity that was established in 1933. So those farmers are going to get some help. Some people are calling it a bailout. Don't go crazy with the whole bailout thing. Come on. All right. Thank you for that comment. Stephen writes, I have a 401k. Half is just a traditional 401k. Half is a Roth. My new employer goes through Charles Schwab. Should I move my 401k over with my new employer? I'm 32. I've got plenty more years of working. Yeah, why not? You can roll it over. You can keep everything in one place. That's easy to do. I'm not 100% sure if you lose anything. I don't know if you've got limited funds inside of Charles Schwab. The only reason to stay with Vanguard is that, the funds are cheap, but Schwab's cheap also. So I might just roll it just so it makes it, essentially much easier to manage. Okay. All right. What's my time here? Oh, that's so funny. So someone asked about the trade deficit article and asking about tracking trade deficits. Why does the Census Bureau track that? I don't know. The Census Bureau does a lot of cool stuff. It's not the Census Bureau is in charge of lots of different data points. It's not just the census, but the Census Bureau or the Bureau will tend to do lots of different things. So what can I say? That's what you need to know. And this final question, at least for this segment, from Dinah, who said that she is entitled to spousal benefits because although she is divorced, she was married for 14 years before she got divorced, and she's not remarried. My understanding is that when I reach full retirement age of 66 and a half, I may draw Social Security based at 50% of his highest earning figure. Well, let me just go over to the Social Security website, ssa.gov. And here's what it says. If you're divorced, but your marriage lasted 10 years or longer, you can receive benefits on your ex-spouse's record. If you are unmarried, you are 62 and older, so you don't have to wait till your full retirement age. Your ex-spouse is entitled to Social Security retirement, and the benefit you are entitled to receive based on your own work is less than the benefit you would receive based on your ex-spouse's work. So your question is, if you draw your Social Security at 62, can you then switch to drawing his when you are 66 and a half? Don't do that. So what I think the reality is you want to wait as long as you can before claiming Social Security. And then I believe you're going to have to draw whichever is higher. And it's not. And again, you can go to ssa.gov. There's a whole section there. But you're unmarried. You're 62 and older. The benefit you are entitled to receive based on your own work is less than the benefit you would receive based on your ex-spouse's work. So I think hopefully you don't have to draw at 62. Wait till his full retirement age and draw 50% of that. I think that answers the question. Whew. Could be. Someone else wants to weigh in on that. Let me know. You are listening to Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, send us an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. We'll be right back.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back with Jill on Money. You want to hear like a great shame of mine? Mark had a huge birthday and I missed it. I didn't know about it. I mean, I knew about it-ish. Anyway, I had to make it up to him. So I had to then go over the top with a gift. So he might cut this whole thing from the intro. You know, that's the control he has. He might have just bleeped this whole part out. I doubt it. Anyway, if you've got a financial question and you'd like to wish Mark a happy belated birthday, send an email to askjill at jillonmoney.com. Askjill at jillonmoney.com. That's what Derek did. And he is writing about an inheritance of foreign funds. He says that he is married to a foreign national, Canadian and British citizen. He and his wife currently live in California. Her father passed away, left her about $300,000 Canadian dollars. We're wondering the best way to get as much of that into the U.S. with minimal tax liability. One side note, her mom, this poor girl, her mom has terminal cancer. There'll be more money coming in. I'm unsure about the dollar amount. That leaves me wondering if there are any limitations on the frequency or amount of money one can bring into the U.S. when it originates from a foreign account. So there are very specific rules, and there are very specific people who deal with this, and it is not my area of expertise. I would do this first. Because you're in California, I presume, especially if you are in Northern, and you don't say exactly where you're from, but if you're in Northern, I bet that there are estate attorneys who deal with foreign nationals. So what I would do is this. I would start looking around for estate attorneys and very specifically say, I need to understand the rules, estate rules with regard to inheriting money. There is usually a very nasty penalty that you would incur in terms of a tax. But I don't know how the rules have changed, and I think it's worth talking to somebody. and to see where you go next. It may be, for example, that they say, okay, you know what? Bring this money in, but when you get the next slug, leave some of it there. Maybe you can dribble it out over time. I don't know, but I wouldn't necessarily go to a tax person. I would go to an estate attorney who's got very specific expertise. Okay, I hope that helps. If you do need help finding that person, or you can't, send me, just let me know where you're located, and I'm sure I can find an estate attorney somewhere who can do this. All right. Okay, that's Derek. Thank you so much for writing. Here is Jay about understanding LIBOR. LIBOR's been in the news quite a bit. And LIBOR is the London Interbank Offered Rate. And it's used to, so this is about LIBOR. I'm just going to explain to you. So LIBOR came under big cloud with a scandal where the different banks that got together kind of colluded in setting this rate. And it's a short-term benchmark lending rate. It's going to be phased out, actually. So it'll be interesting to see what is it's replaced with. Maybe it's the Fed funds rate. I don't know. But anyway, Jay says he wants to understand more about LIBOR and wants to specifically know, why is my bank enacting a rate hike on my adjustable rate mortgage? Because rates are probably higher. Anyway, here's the background. My mother, who passed away in 2006, bought a home in Florida in 2004. And we have not had an increase until this month, a 0.5% increase. Mom borrowed $310,000 at 6.95% for 30 years. My payment was, well, I'm going to just round it, $2,100, and it's now going to $2,182. I've been told that LIBOR is what they go by. That's true. So they, if it's in the document that says your adjustable rate adjusts based on the level of LIBOR, that's what it would do. So I understand the U.S. has had several small interest rate hikes with more expected. LIBOR has remained low. Are they tied together? Unfortunately, the home is in a trust. I'm the sole trustee, but I'm disabled. I can't afford to refinance on my income alone without the additional income that the house provides from rentals to pay the bills. They won't talk to me. Is it legal? Yes, of course it's legal. So the deal about LIBOR that you really need to understand is that it is probably going away. It is closely linked to overnight lending rates in the United States. It's just that it's supposed to be a global benchmark, and I don't think that you're going to have any way to fight this. If the loan itself said, the document says it's tied to LIBOR and LIBOR has increased, then you're going to find that you have an increase. So as I speak to you today, LIBOR for, let's see, a 1-month LIBOR rate is about 2%. And so I think that the reality is you're going to be stuck. You're going to have to figure out what to do with this house. I don't know what to do with it. Maybe you should sell it. I don't know. Anyway, it is legit. I'm sorry you're going through this. Good luck, Jay. All right, you're listening to Jill on Money. If you've got a financial question, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is askjill@jillonmoney.com. You can also go to our website, jillonmoney.com, and there you can just click on the Contact Us button. You should also sign up for our free weekly newsletter. All right, we'll be right back with more of your questions. You're back with Jill on Money. If you've got a question, it could be a career question. How about that? Are you weighing different job offers? I read an amazing statistic that job leavers, job hoppers, get an average of a 30% bump compared to people who just stay where they are. course, that might be a little bit of adverse selection, Mark. It could be that only people who know they can get more go. You know what I mean? But anyway, you might want to look around. Job market's tightening up. All right. If you've got a job, a retirement, a college funding, anything like that, estate planning, shoot us an email. Ask Jill at JillOnMoney.com. Bob will be 65 this fall. Wants to know, does 1 year make a big difference in Social Security payout? Would it be wiser to wait the extra year? Yes, always wait the extra year if you can. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it's a guaranteed increase. So, yeah, wait a year. Also, can you advise me about how I apply for Medicare? I'll tell you what I just did, since I've not ever applied for Medicare. I went to Medicare.gov. So I think this is really great because it's people say that the government doesn't do anything. Some of the websites are very helpful. You can apply for Medicare online. You can create your own account. You should learn about the different parts of Medicare because there's Medicare Part A, which is hospital insurance that covers your inpatient hospital stays or care in a skilled nursing facility, hospice. And then there's Part B, which is your medical insurance, and that covers doctor's services and outpatient care, medical supplies, preventative services. And so the first time you can enroll into Medicare is called your initial enrollment period, and it begins 3 months before the month you turn 65. So check it out. Go to Medicare.gov. That's what you should do, Bob. Thanks so much for writing. Hey, 1 hour just zipped right by. But guess what? There's more. So excited. Stay tuned. 1 more hour of Jill on Money. And if you've got a question, you can always go to the website, JillOnMoney.com, and click on the Contact Us button. So easy to do. All right. We will be right back.
It's the weekend, and that can only mean one thing. You're listening to Jill on Money, the show that takes the mystery out of your finances. Here's your host, Jill Schlesinger.
Welcome to Jill on Money. Here's something exciting. I am talking to you from the Capital One Bank Studios. Yeah. People at Skyview got busy, sold the rights to our studio. Naming rights, Capital One. Capital One Bank Studios, my friends. Brandy new. We've hit the big time once we have naming rights to our studio. Well, perhaps Capital One would like to upgrade our equipment so that Mark doesn't have to re-record various things when the board just fritzes out on us. Okay, I'm just kidding. It doesn't happen that much, just maybe once every other week. Anyway, this is the program that takes the mystery out of your financial life. It's Labor Day weekend. You're on your way somewhere, I'm sure. Or maybe you're just staying put. The summer has gone by really quickly, as it always does. And I'm very revved up after a 2-week vacation. And you are getting geared up because it's back to school. Well, we're going to take you back to school. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We are going to help you learn a little bit about economics. And we've got the perfect person. Linda Yueh. She is an economist and smarty pants like you can't believe. And she's written a book called What Would the Great Economist Do? How 12 Brilliant Minds Would Solve Today's Biggest Problems. You are going to get an education here, so stay tuned. Here is our interview with Linda Yueh. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was really interested in how people become better off. So one of the things that really interests me about economics is just how it allows you to look at how different countries, different policies affect different people. And then ultimately, that is what I think public policy, what economists, what really all of us should be really concerned about. Can we grow richer over time? are people's living standards getting better? So I thought the way to understand it is to study economics.
And where did you study? So, story of your life. You were born where?
I was born in Taiwan.
Okay.
I moved to the U.S. when I was around 5 or 6. And I then started my career as a corporate lawyer at Paul Weiss.
Hold on right now. Stand by. I got to go back. I got to do a little backfill here. Where did you grow up? What state did you grow up?
So Pennsylvania and then Texas.
And you studied law where?
At NYU.
Uh-huh.
And then I stayed here.
And you work at Paul Weiss. You work for the man.
Yep.
White shoe law firm in corporate law?
In corporate law. And then I felt that I didn't really understand how really markets worked. So we did a lot of stuff around M&A, around companies investing. This is really interesting. But I just felt like I didn't really understand how economies really worked. I was looking at only a piece of it. So then I went to Oxford University in England to study it. And then that's actually when I became really interested in economics. And then I didn't really set out to kind of stay there, but I think I've ended up finding lots of interesting things to do there. And then, of course, as you know, I became a broadcaster. I then joined Bloomberg TV as their economics editor, and then I went to the BBC and I was chief business correspondent. And so now I'm still doing a bit of broadcasting. I am doing a bit of teaching, and of course, I have the real privilege of writing books, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, and just being able to go out, talk about ideas, meeting people. And the best part about this book coming out is that I get to be back in New York.
Aha, that's excellent. And really what you needed to do is to create a career that would give you enough flexibility to walk your 3 dogs.
Absolutely.
These are your children.
These are the most important focal points of anyone's day. The waking up, got to let the dogs out, take the dogs out.
So you got that down. Okay. So the other thing that from my research on you, which really is Mark's research that he presents to me, is that you have become a China expert, essentially, right? And for most of our listeners, they hear me say things like China's the second largest economy in the world, like get used to it. Could you give us a little bit of the history of why we are so focused on China, its economy? And then I do want to get into a bit of the trade issue. So China was an agrarian economy until when?
Until about 1949. So that's when the communists took over. And that was when they industrialized the country. So economies grow because they're first agrarian, it's farming and all of that. And then West had the Industrial Revolution, which didn't happen in China, actually. That happened in England, in Germany, and the U.S. in the 19th century. So China was lagging behind by the 20th century. It was still mostly a agrarian, agricultural economy. And then the communists took over in 1949, and then they did a pretty hard and harsh program of industrialization. So think of it as 5-year plans. They followed the way Stalin did it for the Soviet Union. And then by 1979, that clearly wasn't working. This planned economy just can't tell you how many things to produce, because you've got one central planner sitting in Beijing saying, I think across the country we are going to produce 20,000 pairs of shoes today. It just doesn't work, and you don't know how much to sell it for. So in 1979, they started market-oriented reforms. And by injecting capitalism into the economy, that's why we notice China today, because it has grown extremely quickly since that time and has now become the world's second biggest economy. But it is still, I think, an economy we focus on because we don't quite understand it. It still has a communist party in charge.
Right.
But the economy is full of entrepreneurs and some of the most capitalist people you'll meet.
And I think the highest percentage of female billionaires in the world are from China. How does that work? I mean, this is state-sponsored capitalism with a dash of communism. How does that play out in real life? How does an entrepreneur exist in that system?
most of the entrepreneurs that I've met in China, they basically try to work under the radar. So not in the spotlight of government. So the Chinese government clamps down a lot on the internet. They're very worried about information and all of those things that are actually the lifeblood of a lot of tech entrepreneurs. So in many ways, China has succeeded despite government policy. I think that is, if you look at the growth drivers, it's really private enterprises, private firms that have really grown. And they don't really get much involved with government. So I think that's one of the challenges with China. So you have a communist party in charge. They have a political regime that is not really conducive to how a market economy works. Somehow it's worked. And it's, I think, quite a puzzle in and of itself. But when you're the world's second biggest economy, having this very confusing system will cause others to take a look and say, are your firms competing fairly? And that, I think, is one of the main reasons why internationally China is in the spotlight.
All right, we'll get back to our interview with Linda Yueh in just a minute. If you've got a financial question, the easiest way to get in touch with us, just send an email. Ask Jill at jillonmoney.com. When we come back, more of our interview with Linda.
Back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger helps you take the mystery out of your finances.
You're back with Jill on Money, and instead of you going back to school and sitting through Econ 101, which admittedly not usually the favorite course of every student, that said, we've got a nice cheat sheet for you. We've got an economist who speaks plain English. God, that's great. Her name is Linda Yueh. We are continuing our conversation with her. And we started with talking about China in the last segment. And again, if you missed any part of the show in that first segment, we did some really good stuff. You can always go onto the website after we are done with the broadcast. Mark will upload it, so just go to jillonmoney.com. But in that segment, we started to talk about China. We're going to talk more about China, the world's second largest economy, soon to be the world's largest economy. What's interesting to understand is that when somebody is studying this country, has great insight, Linda Yueh is able to sort of unpeel the mystery around the Chinese economy. And that's why we were delighted to have her on. So here is more of our interview with Linda Yueh. What is true about the unfair, quote, I'm putting air quotes on there for everyone who's not watching. What is unfair about the way China treats U.S. goods and services that come into China?
Two ways. One is that the Chinese market isn't as open as the American one. So it's easier for companies like Alibaba to come and set up here than it is for the equivalent company to go and set up there. So Alibaba is a B2B and B2C website. They kind of link up suppliers, and they have web portals to sell products into China. But they've set up in the U.S. But if you think about a tech company, similarly in the internet space, the Chinese market just isn't as open. So that is not a level playing field. I think the other way is that for many years, China's required technology transfers if you wanted to invest in China. So if you are a smartphone maker or whatever it is, if you set up in China, you're going to have to transfer know-how. Sometimes it's because you have to hire local Chinese managers when you work alongside people. That's actually one of the ways to transfer know-how and technology. But of course, that isn't something that American markets require. To set up here, you don't have to have a joint venture. So that in China has begun to be pushed quite hard against by the World Trade Organization, this global trade body, and its trading partners. So a lot of investment in China today is no longer joint ventures. They don't really require technology transfers. But they have a history of having done that. And they also have a weak legal system. So they don't protect intellectual property very well. So I think in those ways, there is a history of unequal market access, of treating foreign firms not quite the same as Chinese firms. But the thing I always like to say is private Chinese firms are also treated this way. So
that's interesting.
It's state-owned firms that are privileged. So it's really, I think, about state ownership versus private firms. So Alibaba that I mentioned is a private firm.
Do you sense that will change in the next iteration as China becomes the world's largest economy, just in size, not per capita, because obviously, they have extra people, so it's not going to work. The math's not going to work there. But is that going to have to change?
Well, in the book, the chapter that I trace through the great thinkers, one of the chapters is called Can China Grow Rich? And I think my answer there is yes, except they are going to have to shed some of the communist, some of the Karl Marx influence that they currently still have in the system, mostly around state ownership of key industries and key assets. So in order for China to grow rich, they have to be a lot more productive, a lot more innovative. It's hard to see how they can do that while you have a dominance of the state in key sectors, but importantly in the banking sector. How can an entrepreneur get finance, get a loan? Those are the kinds of things they're going to have to work through. And I completely agree with you. I think China will become the world's biggest economy. They've got 1 billion more people than the Americans, but that's not the same thing as growing rich.
So what about the idea that as they become, let's say they don't get rich yet, but on the way, they did something that's pretty amazing, which is they lifted so many people out of poverty. Do you sense that there could be a pushback by the people, almost like a unionization, a labor pushback that would help the people start to do better in the Chinese economy?
I think that is exactly where the pressure will come from. So in a communist state, you don't have any safety valves. So if people don't feel like the state is respecting their property, firms and their investment, your ownership of a home, because everything is nominally communally owned by the state, I think that is exactly where you're going to get some push to change the system. And I think that is probably the single biggest issue that will determine whether China becomes rich.
So here's my question to you. You created this book, What Would the Great Economists Do? Did you come up with the questions first or the economists that you wanted to highlight and then frame the questions?
Oh, great question. I actually came up with the questions first because I think the most interesting things or the most pressing things that we need to have a better understanding of are things like, why are wages so low? Do we face a slow growth future? And by looking at the biggest questions facing us today, I realized that that saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Something similar happened in history that we could learn from. And that's actually where the great economists that came up with those ideas, that's how I chose those.
I like the framework for it. So let's start with, so we talked about can China become rich, and that's how you get into a discussion of Karl Marx. So, by the way, everyone listening, stop freaking out. It's a book that is written for non-economists, okay? Right? So it's very normal. There's no formula that
it's very accessible. It's like reading one of my blogs.
It's perfect.
Written,
By the way, not a lot of female economists out there.
No.
So who do we have? We have Janet Yellen.
Janet Yellen. We have
is Lael Brenner an actual is Lael an actual economist, right?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So we got Lael. That's good. We got you. Tell us about Joan Robinson. She's a little bit of a funky one, though. She has a strange life. So talk about who is Joan Robinson.
So Joan Robinson is one of the most influential female economists of the 20th century. She is the one who came up with the idea of monopsony. So now that's just like monopoly, where you have product market power, so you can, set higher prices for your goods and all that kind of stuff. Monopsony is when employers can set wages below what a worker should be paid. So she came up with this in the 1930s, having never really done economics. She did a degree at Cambridge, but she didn't actually do that well. And then she had to come up with a great idea to make her stance. And so in the period of the 1930s, she made a huge name for herself, and she became one of the 5 members of John Maynard Keynes's inner circle who were trusted to read the general theory, his book that launched the Keynesian Revolution. And at the time, she was married to one other member of this inner circle, and she had an affair with another member. So I like to think she kind of held 3 out of 5, a majority of votes on this little council. And then she renounced Keynesianism later on.
That's what I want to get to. So wait a second. Before we do that, okay, you have a separate chapter about Keynes, but can you just do a quickie Keynesian Theory 101 for the listeners?
So Keynesianism said economies don't write themselves. So if you're in a recession or the Great Depression, as in the 1930s, government needs to spend to help the economy. And that was actually a bit of a revelation, because classical economists, the mainstream thinking at the time was economies will write themselves. You don't want government to be involved. And Keynes said famously, in the long run, we're all dead. So we need to do something now.
Okay, we will get back to more of our interview with Linda Yueh in just a moment. During the break, why don't you go to JillOnMoney.com and sign up for our free weekly newsletter? It's free, and it happens weekly. Cool, right? Just go to JillOnMoney.com. All right, we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Jill on Money, where Jill Schlesinger takes the mystery out of your finances.
You're back with Jill on Money. This is the program that takes the mystery out of your financial life. So much confusion out there. And how do we get people more interested in this, as one friend of mine recently called it, deathly boring topic that you cover? Is there a compliment in there? The question was something like this: how do you handle the fact that you cover the most boring? Right? It's not that boring to me. I mean, I really think it's so cool. And here's the thing: our guest, Linda Yueh, is so engaging. She'll make you want to study economics. Okay, she won't make you want to study, but she probably would want you to buy her book. And the book is a great way for you to understand how economics impacts our daily lives. That's why I love this stuff, because pretty much anything that's going on has some financial, economic, business component. And to me, that is exciting. She's written a book called What Would the Great Economists Do? It's 12 brilliant minds and how they would solve today's biggest problems. One of those brilliant minds is Joan Robinson. And here's more of our interview with Linda Yueh. So Joan Robinson, going back 3 out of 5. So she's a part of the Keynesian inner circle, and she really wants to talk about income and tell us how her career developed then.
So she did this path-breaking work around imperfect competition, which is where all her labor and wages and theories came from. And this is just, to me, fascinating, right? So since Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, economists thought that economies were perfectly competitive. It took until the 1930s before Keynes and her and some other of his disciples said, no, actually, markets don't operate perfectly. And so if they don't, we need to look at why and then what we can do about it. And then so she then published works that basically said, when labor markets don't work perfectly, 2 things happen. One is that wages are too low because employers don't have to pay you what you've produced. And the second thing is you end up with what's called hidden or disguised unemployment. So again, this has to do with, actually, it's the it's the U6 unemployment measure. So if you have a part-time job but you want a full-time job, you're not unemployed, you have a job, but you actually are underemployed. So she calls that hidden or disguised unemployment. So once you recognize the problem, then you can say, all right, we need more competition to fix it. And to me, her work has been one of the most influential in thinking about, even today, if you take that and look at the low wage problem that we have, which is the aim of that chapter, why are wages so low? Okay, there are a number of reasons. We know globalization, technology, but it's also because we have a lot of hidden unemployment. So people are working part-time, and in this 21st century where the economy is very dominated by technology that has hollowed out middle-skilled jobs, people are not able to get the same quality of jobs that they had before. It reminded me of when I went to this talk, actually by President Bill Clinton.
By somebody.
So this has been going on for some time. I mean, a woman in the audience raised their hand and said, "Mr. President, you talk about all these jobs you've created. I've got 3 of those jobs, and I can't make ends meet."
So when you think about that, I just want to spend a few minutes on the income inequality because, I was sort of fascinated with the Piketty book and with a lot of this conversations around income inequality. And, when we talk about income inequality, so often the culprit or the scapegoat is low-wage jobs in emerging markets. So whether it's China or anywhere, emerging Asia, and that is the problem. That's how the middle class got screwed and hollowed out. I'm wondering if you have an opinion on what weight we should give to all the different factors that contributed to this. So China entering, sort of becoming more legitimate part of the World Trade Organization, that's part of it. So we call that globalization. But talk about technology in that also. Yeah. And what portion of this problem, and the problem is pretty intense because we really do know that we have not seen real meaningful wage growth for the middle class in basically 2 decades. Is that right?
Yeah, 40 years if you take median income. So it is an incredibly, I think, challenging problem. So most of it is actually down to technology. So yes, globalization, I think, played a bigger role, a few decades ago when China was poor. Now that Chinese wages are rising, you actually see manufacturing reshoring. So Stanley Black & Decker have made their first power tool in the United States. The CEO told me, I write about it in the book, it costs the same to make a power tool in China as in the U.S. because American workers are more productive. But when he says that, it also points to something else, which is even if you remove some of the globalization factors, you still have to look at what is still causing wages to be depressed.
Right.
Technology has replaced repetitive tasks, manufacturing jobs, really in the middle of the skill spectrum. So if you go to a factory today, there are a lot of robots that produce those kinds of cars or power tools, whatever you have. Yes, of course, it makes the workers who are in jobs more productive, but it also means they've displaced a lot of workers. So if you look at what's happened to manufacturing output has grown.
Right. We still are manufacturers in the United States, in Germany,
second biggest
in
the
UK,
world,
right?
The United States is. But manufacturing jobs are down.
Okay.
And that's technology.
So what is the answer here? Channel Joan Robinson. What can we do to help wages? How do we address it?
Yeah, so wage growth of 2.7%, that is better than inflation, but just barely. And I think it's going to take a lot more to raise those wages. The way to do it, workers have to be more flexibly trained and skilled to be able to move around in this economy more so than ever before. It's easier said than done, but I have met, while I've been doing this book talk, 50-some-year-olds who are learning to code. So obviously that's not going to be everyone, but I think we just have to make sure that we are more nimble. The workforce is more nimble, and that is a different way of thinking about education.
Okay, we'll get back to more of our interview with Linda Yueh in just a moment. Now, during the break, what you should do is you can hop on to JillOnMoney.com and you can listen to past shows. And you can also check out some of the stuff that we write You can read, listen, and watch, and of course, sign up for our free weekly newsletter. We'll be right back.
Follow Jill on Twitter and Instagram for more personal finance content. Just use the handle @JillOnMoney. Now, back to the show.
You're back with Jill on Money. Mark, while I was on vacation, somebody told me they loved our Instagram account. And I said I have no idea how to access that because Mark won't give me the password. But thanks. All right. He has given me the password. I went on a social media diet while I was away. Checked nothing, Mark. Nothing. Zero. But now I'm back and I'm ready to rock and roll, and it's time to get engaged. And to get you engaged, answer the question, what would the great economist do? That's what our guest is doing. Her name is Linda Yueh, and she's explored how 12 brilliant minds would solve today's biggest problems. In this segment, we're talking about Irving Fisher. So here's more of our interview with Linda Yueh. Before we finish up, let's see, what chapter do you want to highlight last? Because I can't do every single one, and we want the people to buy the book. This is called The Big Tease, right? So which is the chapter that you want to concentrate on next?
Why don't we do Irving Fisher?
Just because my pen is on that chapter and it's
I love
open?
it. I think this chapter is very relevant to
so
today.
That's why I'm glad that we agree. Okay. So this is chapter 5. Irving Fisher, Are We at Risk of Repeating the 1930s? So now we are actually coming up onto the 10-year anniversary of the failure of Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis. So are we at risk of repeating not just the 30s, but also are we about to see something as maybe the second wave of the Great Recession?
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I think we are lucky that we haven't ended up repeating some of the mistakes they made in the 1930s. So what happened in the 1930s was after the great crash of 1929, there was a second recession at the end of the 1930s. And it was because of policymakers making mistakes. So that's the lesson, I think, that policymakers today have learned from Irving Fisher. He's the guy who came up with the concept of debt deflation. As in when you have a lot of debt, you end up with deflation. Prices fall. You can look at Japan, a country that probably didn't learn the lessons of what you don't want to end up with after you have a big financial crash. So I think, knock on wood, this table is not wood, that we have already learned a lot of the most important lessons about making sure that you don't end up in a deflationary mindset, because that's essentially what's happened in Japan. If you expect prices to fall, consumers put off their purchases because it'll be cheaper in the future. And when you all have that mindset, it's so hard to turn it around. It's not just a question of the central bank printing cash, because the Bank of Japan has done a lot of that. And so I think the economy is on a stronger recovery than we have seen over the last few years. Monetary policy, interest rates are beginning to go up, so things are moving back to normal, but it's going slowly. And I think that is because central bankers and others are looking at what happened in the 30s and thinking, okay, we don't want to end up in any way repeating what was a very, very difficult decade.
Do you credit Ben Bernanke for his actions during the crisis as sort of saving the system?
I do. I think he is actually discussed in that chapter. His academic work builds on Irving Fisher's research. So he takes Fisher's theories and he adapts it for the modern economy. So there's a financial sector in there. So I think Ben Bernanke realized that it was better to do too much than to do too little. You're never going to get it quite right.
Right.
And I think so initially when he stepped in and said, yeah, okay, we're going to have to reflate the economy. And that's when quantitative easing, cash injections, slashing interest rates to 0%. I think all of that plus a big rescue plan for the banks that didn't have any stigma attached if you were to tap the liquidity. I think he kept the system afloat. I think probably is what's more debatable is how long the system should have been maintained over the past 10 years. And that's more of a judgment call. So Janet Yellen and, of course, now Jay Powell, they have, I think they are now moving towards a more normal, interest rate. But I think in the aftermath of Lehman's collapse in 2008 and we saw what happened with all the linkages in the financial system, I think it was probably right to err on the side of just doing a bit too much.
Yeah.
But here's the challenge. Robert Solow, who I write about, the Solow paradox he coined, says you can see the computer age everywhere except in the productivity data. So today's technologies do not raise productivity the way they used to across the economy.
Right, because if swiping left and right doesn't really do a ton for us.
No, apparently, it's not quite the same as electrification or the internal combustion
Exactly.
engine.
we went from like, oh, it's the advent of air conditioning versus swiping left and right.
That's right. And that's the challenge. So one of the things that I look at in that chapter about how do we avoid a slow growth future is where you have spurts of productivity picking up is in the late 1990s. So what happened there in the U.S. was companies worked harder to embed technology in the way that they work. So instead of just focusing on big innovations like I'm going to produce the next iPhone or what have you, you actually take the technology and you make sure it actually improves how your company operates. So I think technology has to be viewed not just as big breakthroughs. We're never going to have another invention of the steam engine or electricity, but what we can do is to make sure the technology of today help us work better and more efficiently. I think that's the key to raising our growth rate, is to have this technology better embedded.
All right. Thanks so much to Linda Yueh for joining us. What a great interview. Go buy her book, What Would the Great Economists Do? Very easy to read. So please, I really encourage you to do so. When we return, we'll do a quick question from you, and then we'll wrap up the show. So we'll be right back. You're back with Jill on Money. Before we head out for the show, want to squeeze in at least another question, maybe two. This one's from Gabe, who's recently sold a rental property, wants to know the approximate taxes that he owes for the upcoming year. He purchased the property for about $118,000, and he did that 15 years ago. He sold it for $205,000. When all was said and done, he got a nice check at closing for $137,000. He's got $86,000 of income, taxable income at $65,000. Okay, so he wants to know, like, how am I going to figure out my taxes? So here's something that's kind of interesting. If you're single, your AGI at $86,000 probably puts you either mostly in the 22% tax bracket. But the more important part about rental income is that rental property is that it's not just capital gains you have to pay. If you were treating this property as rental income and you were using depreciation, it's like that magic weird thing that you can actually create a loss when you don't have a real loss. In other words, you have this thing called depreciation, and the government allows you to sort of mark down, a loss against your income, and that's all well and good while you're still receiving income. But upon the sale of the property, you must recapture that income. And so often what you can find is that, like you're saying to me, you have, let's call it about $100,000 gain or $90,000 gain. Normally, that would be a piece of cake, 20% long-term capital gains. But if you were depreciating that asset and had been taking a certain amount of money every year in depreciation, you would have to add that back in and count that as income. So I don't know what your tax liability is going to be because I don't know how you treated this property. I think you should absolutely, even if you don't work with a tax preparer in general, for this tax year, I think you should work with one. Now is a perfect time to go find one because they're not busy, and make sure that you treat this properly because it can be an audit flag. Okay, well, that's it. And that is the end of the show. And thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can always go to the website Jill on Money all week long, get lots of great content. You can read, listen, watch, and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.